So this video will examine the different types of transport mechanisms that can occur across the cell's plasma membrane. And the cell's plasma membrane is actually what we call selectively permeable. And so it means that it's going to allow some things through, such as nutrients and wastes, but other things cannot pass through, such as proteins or phosphates. So let's go ahead and look at the different types of transport mechanisms that can occur. And they are basically divided into two categories, what we call passive transport and active transport. And the main difference between these two is that passive transport processes do not require ATP. So do not require ATP or energy, versus active processes require ATP. And the reason behind this is that passive processes actually involve movement of substances, what we call down their concentration gradient. And so this means that they are moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So movement of solutes or substances down the concentration gradient or difference in concentration. And so this means going from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And so we're going to look at different examples of passive transport. But before that, let's go ahead and summarize what active transport means. So it requires ATP, as well as movement of substances against the concentration gradient. And the term against the concentration gradient implies that substances are moving from their area of low concentration, so where there is few of that substance, few concentration, few amount, to an area of high concentration. And so this direction will require ATP or energy. So let's start with the different types of passive processes. All right, so the first type of passive process that we're going to be looking at is what we call filtration. To understand filtration, let's go ahead and look at an example of a permeable membrane, and this time let's go ahead and look at one of our smallest blood vessels, and that is called a capillary. And as you know, capillary is a type of blood vessel, and so it has blood, or blood cells, passing through. Okay? So blood cells, plasma, fluids, a lot of things dissolved in this blood. And so this blood, or this fluid, is then going to exert pressure on the walls of this capillary. And this pressure is called blood hydrostatic pressure. So it's pressure exerted by the fluid on the wall of the capillary. And as a result, it's going to result in movement of some of the fluids out of the capillary across the wall, so between the gaps of the cells lining the wall of the capillary. And so this movement of fluid outside of the capillary is called filtration. So as a definition, this is the process by which physical pressure forces, in this case hydrostatic pressure, force the fluid through the selectively permeable membrane. And then an example of that would be kidney filtration. And that is how our blood is filtered in the kidney in order to get rid of the waste and any excess substances to be sent out as urine. All right, now let's look at a second example of passive processes of transport. And the second example that we're going to look at is what we call simple diffusion. And so simple diffusion is going to be defined as the net movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration of that specific particle. And so this is what we call moving down the concentration gradient until equilibrium is reached. And so, for example, let's say we have this particle highly concentrated, let's say on the outside of the membrane, and then lesser concentration on the inside of the membrane. What you're going to expect due to simple diffusion is movement of that particle from an area of high concentration to the area of low concentration, and this is an example of simple diffusion. There are some factors that are going to speed this movement or this diffusion, and so temperature is one factor that is going to affect the speed of diffusion. And so as you heat up the particles will move faster, and then diffusion will occur at a faster rate. Also, the molecular weight of the particles. So the smaller the particles, the faster they'll move, and then the larger the particles, the more sluggish they're going to be, and this is going to decrease the rate of diffusion. Also, we have the concentration of the particle. And so particles will diffuse more rapidly if there is a greater concentration difference across the two sides of the membrane. Now, example number 3 is going to be osmosis. Osmosis is known as the flow of water from one side of a selectively permeable membrane to the other. So it's going to be the net flow of water across the selectively permeable membrane. So water is going to move from the area of high water concentration to the area of lower water concentration. So it's going to move from an area that is more watery and this is also going to be the area with less solute dissolved in the water, to the area that is less watery, or less watery means more solute concentration. So this is the direction of osmosis. Right, and then our last example of passive process is going to be facilitated diffusion. And this also uses diffusion, movement of substances from a high concentration to a low concentration, but the new addition is that this is facilitated. And so this is going to require the use of carrier proteins. So carrier proteins are embedded in the plasma membrane. And they are going to act as channels or helpers to move particles from the area of high concentration to the area of low concentration. So for example, if we were to draw, let's say, the plasma membrane, and then let's go ahead and visualize a carrier protein embedded in that plasma membrane. So this carrier is going to assist with the movement of particles from their area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So the channels will open, for example, allow the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to the area of low concentration. And so this is also an example of a passive process.